Your P&L says you made 15% net profit last year. Your bank account says you might have trouble making payroll this Friday. I'm Billy Malone, and this is Beyond the Estimate. I spent years as a financial consultant to contractors. Real files, real numbers, dozens of companies. And this gap is the single most common thing I saw, and almost nobody explains it to you. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why this happens, and it's probably not what you think. Here's the first one, and it catches almost everybody off guard. If your P&L shows 15% net profit, your equipment loans and truck payments can still be quietly eating that entire number or a big portion of it, and your P&L will never once show you that's happening. I worked with an HVAC owner. I'll change his name here. Let's call him Dave, doing about $4 million a year. Dave was really proud. His P&L said he'd made $500,000 that year. And he looked at me and said, "Then why can I barely make payroll?" Turned out Dave had just financed 6 new service trucks. Nothing crazy, smart move for a growing company. But those truck payments, almost $200,000 a year, and his P&L didn't show a penny of it. Here's why. A loan payment isn't one thing, it's two: interest and principal. Interest is a real expense, and it shows up on your P&L, same as payroll or materials. Principal is different. That's not an expense at all. It's paying down money that you already owe. Think of it like paying off a credit card. The interest portion is the cost of carrying the balance, but the payment toward the actual balance isn't a cost. It's just moving money that you already spent. Your P&L only ever sees the interest portion. The principal, often the bigger part of the payment, just disappears from the picture entirely. That's exactly what happened to Dave. His P&L was completely accurate, and it still couldn't tell him where his cash went. Here's the part that catches growing companies especially hard. The bigger you get, the bigger your truck and equipment payments usually get too, which means this blind spot doesn't shrink as you grow, it gets more expensive. Here's something simple you can do today. Pull out your loan and equipment statements. Almost every lender already breaks out exactly how much of each payment is principal versus interest. It's usually printed right there. Add up just the principal for the month and subtract that number from whatever your P&L says you made. That's closer to what's actually still in your bank account than the profit number ever was. And that's assuming your books are set up right in the first place, which, for a lot of contractors, they're not. We'll get to exactly why in a minute. So let's say you go check your loan statements just like I showed you, and you subtract out the principal, and the math still doesn't work. That's when I tell you to look somewhere else entirely. Who's doing your books, and were they ever actually trained to do this? Let's look at a drywall and framing company. It's a family business. We'll call her Carol. She's doing the books, maybe $2 million a year. Carol's the owner's sister-in-law. She's sharp, she's trustworthy, and she's been doing the books for 6 years. Nobody ever taught her the difference between a loan payment and an expense. So when the company financed a new box truck, Carol did the obvious thing. She coded the entire monthly payment, principal and interest together, straight to an expense account. It made sense to her. The money left the bank account, so it's an expense, right? Except now the P&L is doing the opposite of what happened with Dave, overstating the problem instead of hiding it. Because part of that expense was never a cost at all. Sometimes it's an even smaller mistake than that. The payment lands in the right place, but the interest just never gets split out, and the numbers quietly look better than they should instead of worse. Either way, none of this is Carol's fault, and it's not the owner's fault either. Nobody sat either of them down and explained this. I've seen this exact mistake at $1 million companies. I've seen the identical thing at $10 million companies. It doesn't go away when you grow. It just gets more expensive. Here's something simple you can do. Ask whoever handles your books this exact question. Do we have this loan set up correctly? And are we splitting out the interest from the payment every month? You don't have to know a lot about accounting to ask that question. If they can't answer it clearly, that's not a reflection on them. It's just a sign nobody's ever walked through this with them, and it's worth doing something about. And here's the honest truth. This happens more often than you'd think. It's not just the smallest companies either. I've seen this at businesses doing millions of dollars a year, well established, successful by any measure. Somewhere along the way, nobody ever qualified the person keeping the books, and the company just grew around that gap instead of fixing it. I know that's not always an easy thing to hear or an easy thing to act on. Maybe that person's family, maybe they've been with you for years, but if the answer to that question wasn't clear, it might be time to think seriously about bringing in someone who actually knows how to do this, even if that's a hard conversation to have. Before we keep going, if this is useful, please hit subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of stuff I'll be breaking down every week. Okay, but let's say your books are actually clean now. Loans set up right, interest split out, someone qualified doing the work. You're still not out of the woods, because there's one more place this cash can disappear. And depending on who's handling it for you, it might already be somebody's job to be catching it. Okay, right now, off the top of your head, do you know how far past due your oldest unpaid invoice actually is? Most owners can't answer that. A commercial electrical contractor, let's say his name's Marcus, doing about $6 million a year, good crews, steady work. Marcus billed a general contractor $85,000 right when the job wrapped up. He knew the invoice was still outstanding. He just didn't realize it had been sitting unpaid for 110 days because nobody at his company actually owned checking on it. By the time Marcus found out, the GC had gone through a rough patch of their own, and Marcus ended up collecting less than half of what he was owed. Here's the thing. That $85,000 sat on Marcus's P&L the whole time, counted as revenue he'd already earned. His profit looked exactly the same whether that invoice ever got paid or not. You might assume that when you're looking at your P&L, you're looking at money that's actually been spent or money that's actually come in the door. For most contractors, that's not the case. Your P&L is built to count revenue the moment you send the invoice, not the moment the cash actually lands in your account, unless you're one of the few running your books on a cash basis. So billed and collected are two completely different things, and your P&L genuinely cannot tell you which one you're looking at. I'm sure a lot of you already know what an AR aging report is. You've probably seen it sitting there in your accounting software. The problem usually isn't that you don't know it exists. It's that a lot of the time, nobody's actually looking at it closely, or there's no real process built around it. And honestly, this was one of the biggest problems I saw walking into almost every single company I worked with. It was one of the first things I sit down and look at. Everybody assumes somebody's making the calls on overdue invoices. Be honest. When's the last time someone at your company actually made those calls consistently, week after week? A lot of the time, nobody actually is because nobody wants to. I mean that. Chasing people for money is one of the most avoided tasks in any business I've ever seen. And just assigning it to somebody doesn't fix it. You need an actual process. Real accountability, where whoever's responsible has to put a note right on that customer's account in your accounting software, saying exactly who they called and what was said. Without that, it quietly doesn't happen, no matter whose job it technically is. Here's something simple you can do today. Pull up that AR aging report and look at how much money is sitting in the buckets furthest out, 60, 90 days and beyond. Construction gets paid slow. That's just the nature of this business. So don't panic over money sitting there at 30 or 60 days. But the longer it goes past that, the more it's worth asking. Is this just how this client always pays, or is this one actually getting away from us? So, loan payments that never touch your P&L, bookkeeping mistakes that quietly overstate or understate your numbers, and invoices you've already counted as income that you haven't actually collected yet. 3 completely different problems, same result every time. Your P&L tells you one story, and your bank account tells you another. And there's more to this than what we covered today. There's a whole other layer to why your numbers can be technically accurate and still mislead you. And that's exactly what I'm getting into next. Now, I started doing this work because I spent years watching good, hardworking owners get blindsided by exactly what we just went through. Not because they were bad at running their business, but because nobody ever explained it to them. That's why I started Stravalon. If you want someone to actually sit down and look at your numbers, there's a link below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.